overcome with guilt at what they have done, so they internalize everything that they had rejected while Moses was alive.
Freud goes on to reinterpret the crucifixion in terms of Jewish history.
Guilt has to be relieved. You can't walk around forever burdened by excessive guilt. So Christianity provides humanity with a way of relieving guilt. The murder of God's Son is a sacrifice that atones, not for the eating of the apple in the Garden of Eden, but for the murder of the primal Father. So Christianity offers relief from unbearable guilt. And Judaism rejects that offer of relief. The world repays Judaism with eternal hatred. That's Freud's deep-seated psychological explanation for anti-Semitism.
Freud is identified with Moses, who brings the commandments, who preserves the tablets of the law, and who brings not only a new set of regulations, but a new way of understanding human nature to humanity.
The thing that is most significant for a reader of the Bible or anyone who knows the story is that there is no God to tell Moses what to do. Like Freud, Moses tells himself what to do. He is his own man.
But historic events forced Freud to stop working on the manuscript.
Now this is already Hitler in Vienna. That's our house looked with the swastikas on it.
In March of 1938, the German army occupied all of Austria. They began the systematic persecution and deportation of Austria's Jews.
Oh, and that is the crowds cheering Hitler. Look at the crowd. That's how it looked.
It was an extraordinarily disturbed period. People were refugees on the move all over the continent. He clearly didn't appreciate the monstrous nature of the brutality that the Nazis had in mind. He didn't foresee that the burning of the books was a prelude to the burning of people.
Finally, Freud saw the danger and allowed friends to buy the visas that would permit him to leave with his family.
We are waiting more or less patiently for our affairs to be settled. In view of the little time we have left to live, I fret at the delay. Anna's youthful vigor and optimistic energy have fortunately remained unshaken. Otherwise, life would be difficult to carry on at all.
We left Vienna by a night train and spent a day of rest in Paris. My brother Ernst, who came to Paris to meet us. My father hoped to see something of Paris again, but he was too tired from the trip.
Here is a man facing death in exile, like Moses leaving Egypt. And he will not get into the promised land. He doesn't really believe that there is an afterlife. He faces death with an attempt again to review his own line of reasoning, the question of whether one believes or disbelieves in a paradise, in a heaven, a hell, in a life after death, in immortality. And he rejects all of that for him on the basis of the perpetuation of childhood fantasy into adult life. He thinks that this is not realistic and that one should face death stoically with a realization that that is part of life. It's the end of life. We do not know why it was designed this way, that life should come to an end.
Once established in London, Freud published Moses and Monotheism. The book outraged both Jews and Christians. Though old and sick, Freud was as defiant of his critics as he had been throughout his life.
He's in England. He is suddenly freed from all of the constraints of that public face that he had to present in Vienna. And he can do things that, in a sense, he wants to now do as a public figure. At the same time that he writes Moses and Monotheism, he writes an open letter in English against the persecution of the Jews. Does he do it as a Jew or as a scientist or as a psychoanalyst? At this point, he's all of them.
Oh, this is definitely a birthday. It's the last birthday.
Freud usually wound the clock in his study. He had not. He was too sick. And Freud knew that his time was up. The end was very near.
Our unconscious does not believe in its own death. It behaves as if it were immortal. We cannot imagine our own death, and when we attempt to do so, we can perceive that we are, in fact, still spectators.
He faced a great deal of pain and suffering with as minimal treatment as possible, because he was always concerned that it might interfere with his thought processes. He didn't want to be in a state where he might be logy, lethargic, dazed, unable to concentrate.
I cannot face the idea of life without work. Well, what would one do when ideas failed or words refused to come? It is impossible not to shudder at the thought.
All of a sudden, he has to come to terms with this new life, and he does it remarkably. I mean, it's an enormously productive moment, given all of these other constraints. And his arrangement, of course, with his physician was that if he was no longer, this was an arrangement that went back to Vienna, he was no longer able to deal with the pain of the cancer, he would be given an overdose of morphine, which at some point he decides he actually needs.
My dear, sure. You remember our first talk? You promised me then you would not forsake me when the time had come. It is only torture now. It no longer makes any sense.
He had all his antiquities with him, all his gods that he talked to, and his personal intellectual life there with him. It is my personal conviction that the ghost of Moses, it was saying to him, come on, have the courage to get rid of God to the very end. And he died as self-possessed he has lived, not asking for consolation, not asking anyone to protect him, but simply dying as he had lived, with this kind of rebellious defiance and conqueror's stance.
That is when 3 men of the Royal Society came to present the book of the Royal Society for signature to my father, because he was not well enough to go there. And I think on that same picture is the signature of Darwin. There was a very nice moment.